Okay, so let's talk about adults. Um, so their identity development, obviously they may have started in youth, so we had this a similar process. Um, but as far as identity development is developing a transgender identity, sometimes people don't really realize it, or they feel like they can't deal with it, or they hide it for a long period of time, and they might not come out until they're an adult. They may express their identity in many different ways. They may go through stages. We have all these stage models of identity development. They may go through that. They may go back and forth. And a lot of it has to do with where they are in society, how much prejudice is in the community, and how much they do of those models. This is Ari Lev's model of identity development for the trans community. And so for adults, awareness comes up in, they've probably known it for a while, but usually something significant happens that really pushes them. For adolescents, sometimes it's, even if they've gone through puberty, they made it fine through that, it's their first sexual experience, and then they realize it doesn't work for them, that it's not, either they can't be sexual, or they can't stay in their body and be sexual because it doesn't work for them. This can happen for adults as well. Many adults will go into hyper trying to be, like you'll see a lot of MTFs that were in the military, where they try to be as masculine as possible, thinking that they can get rid of it. They might get married as a way to hide their gender identity or to fix it. And usually at some point they just can't do it anymore. And they become fully aware that it is an issue that they have to deal with. And then they start seeking out and reaching out for information. They'll get on the internet now. We have this great resource of the internet. Problem with the internet is there's lots of bad information as well as good information out there. There are a lot of community groups that transgender folks will go seek out. And usually there's a lot of self-exploration before they ever talk to anybody significant. Now, if they've got a close relationship, if they're married or they have a partner, they may discuss this stuff with their partner. There used to be that when somebody transitioned from one gender to another, that they were required to move to another town, change their name and everything, totally cut themselves off from their family, get divorced, because the idea was that they couldn't possibly survive if they didn't start out with people who absolutely didn't know them and didn't have any idea that they had once lived in the opposite gender. Obviously, that's really traumatic and not very helpful. So what's been happening more and more is that you find that people are actually quite supportive, families are quite supportive, and they stick by their kids and their adult kids and their partners. There are a lot more couples out there than you would realize that stay together. Now, there are a lot that break up because they can't negotiate what happens, what it means. One of the important things in disclosure is that unlike when somebody comes out as gay or lesbian, a partner of a transgender person has to rethink their sexual orientation too. If I'm going to stay with somebody, say you're a woman, you're in a heterosexual marriage, your husband comes out to you and says, I'm really a woman, I want to stay with you, and she doesn't identify as lesbian and really likes men. So how do you negotiate that stuff? So there's a big part of what comes in as you see clients coming in around doing this, if they've been married or if they have kids, it's how do we negotiate our relationship? And there's some really amazing ways that couples have learned to negotiate their relationship. Sometimes they open it up sexually, sometimes it works out and they just identify in this new community. So each couple is very different. They're very unique in how they do this, but do not assume that they need to break up because of this. So usually they come out to close people and they kind of start exploring this stuff. They play with gender a little bit, trying to figure out where they fit with that stuff. Some people are very clear. Other people need to mess with it for a while before they figure out where they fit and how they label themselves. So there's a lot of exploration around identity and self-labeling. What does this mean? I've heard a lot of trans men who talk about being misogynists, fear that they just hate women, like somehow they hate women and so they hate themselves or something, and that's why they're trying to do it. So there's a lot of these issues that come up. And trans men who are part of the lesbian community, who had a very feminist bent, have a lot of struggles around this. They can actually be ostracized from their communities as a result of transitioning. So the other exploration that will come is around actual transition issues. And am I going to modify my body? Am I going to take hormones? How far do I want to go with this? Do I just want hormones, or do I actually want surgeries? And it's sort of a step-by-step process as people go through all that stuff. And I think of it as I love Ari Lev's way of talking about it as a transgender emergence, because it's really a coming into yourself, of really becoming fully authentic and finding where that place is. For some people, it's a fluid place somewhere in the middle. They bounce around with gender and they find a place. Some people are cross-dress, and it's not about different gender identity. They may see themselves as fully male or female, but they like wearing clothes of the opposite sex. And there's a way in which they play with gender that fits a part of who they are. Some couples are fine with that. Some partners are fine with that. Others are not. So those are all kinds of issues that come up around this stuff. I spend a lot of time talking about transsexuality, which is just one part of the transgender community, but there are a lot of people who are gender fluid, who live in, I kind of think of gender, you can think of gender as a web personally, that there's this web, this fingerprint that I have of gender identity and my gender expression and all that. I think of the whole community as a sphere, and that somebody can take a place that's a pinpoint, on a sphere. So my gender is male, masculine, I'm on a point. My gender may not be so broad. And somebody else's gender may be much more expansive and may take a bigger space on that sphere. I like the sphere because it's not linear. So the other piece is that once you get to a place where you kind of get a sense of where your gender is and where it fits and all that, and labels, they did a study of the trans community. Mostly it was of trans women and cross-dressers, and some trans men, younger trans men. And the study found that there was I can't remember, it was well over 100 different definitions or terms that people describe themselves by as words for their gender identity. So it just comes to the point of you really have to ask people how they identify and how they describe themselves. What words do they use to describe who they are and how they express that in the world, because they can be very different. And the last sort of stage is really the integration stage, where people come to an acceptance of who they are, and they kind of walk in the world in the way they want to. And I think this is sort of a lifelong thing. There's a process of coming out that's very different for the trans community than it is, particularly for somebody who's transsexual and transitions, because they may not be identifiable to anybody in their community. And if they want to identify themselves, they actually have to go out and express it and tell people, this is who I, or what I once looked like, or, a lot of people don't identify with their past as who they are. So there comes up issues around that stuff. And I will tell you that with the trans folks that I work with who have transitioned, who are living their lives, particularly if they're living more stealth lives, a lot of their issues are around identity management. How do I let people know who I am or not? How do I keep people from finding out anything about my past? How do I just keep what I've got? And if you look at the latest research on discrimination in the trans community, so many people lose their jobs based on their identity, lose their work, that it is a concern for the community to think about who knows and what are they going to do with that information.